table. With us here, Republican strategist Bradley Blakeman, and also with us, Democratic media strategist Franco Ripple. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks.
Always a pleasure.
While candidates such as Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz have picked up celebrity endorsements, the breakdown of relevant endorsements are much more surprising. 538 put together a chart scaling representatives as scaling as 1 point each, right? Senators 5 points, and governors, well, they get 10 points, right? So top of the chart, there you have Jeb Bush with 51, Marco Rubio 43, Chris Christie 26, Mike Huckabee 26, John Kasich 20, Ted Cruz 17, Rand Paul 15, and surprisingly Donald Trump 0. Other candidates scored under 5. So Bradley, let's start with you. In a race where the so-called political outsiders appear to be dominating, how much do political endorsements from within the government really matter?
The only endorsements that matter are from those who have an organization that they can turn on and help. So that's really elected officials, because they have precinct captains, they have county chairmen that can easily be used for a candidate, and that's where you really get the bang for your buck. It's not necessarily the endorsement, it's the organization. And to me, I think that's probably the most value in a state like Iowa. You want Iowa endorsements. Why? Because that's where the foot soldiers are, and those are the people you need to turn out the vote.
Franco, do you agree with that? Is it really about the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent, individual politicians who have a strong national network of people who follow what they say, their endorsement does have value. But I'll definitely agree with Brad that organizations, and on the left side of the aisle, it's largely labor unions and organizations that that really have a lot to do with the heart. Those that the Human Rights Campaign, for example, that protects marriage equality, organizations that protect a woman's right to choose. Those are strong emotional arguments to make, and those are the kind of organizations that when you get their endorsement, those people are willing to come out and work the phones and doors for you and give money.
Yeah, we talked about Nate Silver's 538, and he was saying that those particular politicians, the elected officials, those are the endorsements that tend to matter. As you mentioned, Hillary Clinton got a 500 score, much higher than Bernie Sanders has on that campaign. Guys, we've been talking so much about these polls. Are we looking at the wrong metrics here when it comes to trying to determine who's going to win these? Maybe not, because Jeb Bush is at the top of the Republican side on that. But if there's anybody in there who is a surprise, based on the kind of endorsements they've been able to get, Bradley, on the Republican side, who could be a big surprise in Iowa and New Hampshire?
Well, of course, you know, if you look at the latest polls and hear Trump has surged way ahead of Ted Cruz. Now, that can change because, as we know, in the caucus state of Iowa, they tend to make up their minds in the last closing days of the caucus, and even on caucus day, because a caucus is nothing more than a parlor meeting. It's not a secret ballot. You're with your neighbors at a church or a VFW. And in the secret ballot, the first in the nation, which is New Hampshire, in the primary, we know historically that they tend to make up their minds in the closing days and even on primary day. So those are the real polls that matter, is the closing days. And the upset could be for Trump, obviously in Iowa with Ted Cruz winning, and even in New Hampshire, if Ted Cruz were to knock Donald Trump off, I think that'll take him down a peg, even in the closing days in New Hampshire. And you could get a Chris Christie or Marco Rubio or a Kasich winning, and maybe Trump coming in.
If you're Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and we'll throw Martin O'Malley in there because he's still technically in the race, but who is the one Democrat that you really want to get before the primary is said and done that's going to bring it home for you?
Well, it's a great question because, you know, the president is certainly being a statesman here and not necessarily endorsing. The other person who I think the endorsement would certainly matter would be Vice President Joe Biden. And I don't know necessarily either, again, with his long history of statesmanship, looking at having been a potential candidate himself, and also his closeness to the president. They are really almost like brothers now in a lot of ways. I think his endorsement matters very, very heavily. But again, to agree with Brad, the organizational endorsements, again, with labor unions on the Democratic side, looking at perhaps what SEIU and AFSCME and the AFL-CIO will be important.
All right, Bradley, on the Republican side, we know Chuck Grassley has been making the rounds in Iowa. He was at a Donald Trump event. He's going to be at a Jeb Bush event today. Is he the one guy that you really want to sign up for your team in Iowa before this is all said and done?
Yeah, I mean, if Chuck Grassley were to come out even 2 days before the primary. An endorsement like that you want to hold because you want it to be a surprise and you want the earned media domination in the 2 days leading up to the caucus. Chuck Grassley would be a tremendous get. Whoever gets him, I think, will benefit from it.
I wonder if he will weigh in. We know Governor Terry Branstad has already weighed in on Ted Cruz coming out against Donald Trump. Do you think that, last question 20 seconds ago, that has the most to do with Ted Cruz's ascendancy in the polls as of late?
I think it has everything to do with ethanol and his son being a agent for the ethanol business. It's all about ethanol.
It's all about ethanol. That corn in Iowa. Don't underestimate it. Gentlemen, stick around. Franco and Bradley are going to be back with us for round 2 of the Roundtable coming up after this. We're going to talk about President Obama, what he had to say about the top 2 Democratic frontrunners. Is that going to have any impact on the Iowa caucuses? Plus, will Michael Bloomberg jump in the race? We're also going to weigh in on that. Franco Ripple, Brad Blakeman are coming back after this.
Is generating so much interest and enthusiasm.
I am enthusiastically pursuing the opportunity to reach every single voter in Iowa.
I think we'll win that election.
I feel good about where we are.
The Democratic primaries have turned into a battle of who has the most enthusiasm, and with the next Democratic debate tomorrow evening, it is sure to be a showdown between at least 2 of them. There is somebody else in there. Let's bring back in our roundtable. Rejoining us is Republican strategist Bradley Blakeman and Democratic media strategist Franco Ripple. Thanks for sticking around, gentlemen.
All right, so it's a battle to see who's more enthusiastic. President Obama also weighed in on the Democratic race during an interview with Glenn Thrush at Politico. Here is what he had to say about the issue of enthusiasm in this race.
You're always looking at the bright, shiny object that people haven't seen before. That's a disadvantage to her. Bernie is somebody who has the virtue of saying exactly what he believes, great authenticity, great passion, and is fearless.
I guess in this scenario, President Obama was the bright, shiny object in 2008. But Franco, President Obama likening Bernie Sanders to a shiny object, is that to say that he thinks Hillary Clinton maybe sounds a little dull out there on the campaign trail?
No, I don't think so at all. I think if you really look through the Politico piece and the podcast, I think he really is doing all he can to support Secretary Clinton, and he certainly didn't say anything bad about Bernie Sanders. Just keep in mind one thing. When talking about a bright, shiny object, what I think he means is someone who isn't a household name until now in America, because Bernie Sanders has spent more than a quarter century in Congress. He's not the outsider that he portrays, but I found it interesting in that interview that President Obama mentioned the situation with the sailors crossing into Iran, because he's clearly trying to say there, you can't elect a one-issue candidate, which sometimes Bernie Sanders verges on being. You've got to have command of all the issues, which Hillary Clinton does.
He seemed to want to kind of have it both ways, where he's talking about Bernie Sanders being able to elicit the emotions of the voters, where Hillary Clinton does have that experience. But Bradley, when it comes down to these 2 candidates, whether it's about emotion or not, I'm willing to bet you'd still rather see the Republican nominee run against Bernie Sanders.
Look, Bernie Sanders, the crazy uncle, sure would like to run against him. But let me tell you this, Hillary Clinton, Democrats will rue the day they ever coronated Hillary Clinton, because she's going to be indicted, possibly. She's under FBI investigation. There's probable cause, I'll put my lawyer hat on, to believe she's committed numerous crimes. There are 150 FBI agents swirling around. 38 agents were after John Dillinger, and 150 agents were after Hillary. I don't think she survives this. The question is, who comes next?
Well, how about Michael Bloomberg? He's talking about possibly coming in, according to the New York Times. He has instructed advisors to draw plans for a potential independent campaign in this year's presidential race. So, Franco, do you think this has anything to do with the fact that he also may be fearful that Hillary could be indicted?
No, not whatsoever. I think, look, much like Donald Trump, Michael Bloomberg is someone who's been in every party and no party. He's been a Republican when it suited his purposes to run for mayor of New York City. He's been a Democrat. He's been an independent. The thing Michael Bloomberg needs to remember is that one of the issues he cares most deeply about, which is reducing gun violence in America. I mean, that has really become his signature platform issue. If he wants to see that advanced across America, he has to see a Democrat elected president, because if a Republican gets in there, what protections law-abiding citizens have now from gun violence will be rolled back. And there's only been two semi-successful independent candidacies in history: 1912 Teddy Roosevelt and 1992 Ross Perot. And neither guy got the presidency, so I don't know what he hopes to gain here.
Well, the guy is like, what, $35.5 billion? How likely, and I'm going to ask the same question to you, Bradley, but Franco, how likely do you think it is that he will put his name in the hat?
I think he's looked at this a couple of times before. He does his polling. I think what he's going to find is that he's not as well known as he thinks he is outside of some elite circles. And I certainly wish him well, but I don't think ultimately he'll run, and he shouldn't.
Bradley, what do you think?
I think, look, he's a smart businessman. If he's going to make an investment, he's going to do it based on facts. And he said March is the time he's going to look to make a decision. And why is March important? Because you're going to understand by that time who actually is going to be the likely nominee from both the Republicans and the Democrats. If it's going to be Trump, I think that helps Michael Bloomberg. If Hillary falters and fails because of her criminal activity, I think that helps Mike Bloomberg make a decision. So it's all going to come down, I think, to who is the likely nominee from both parties, and then he'll make a decision based on the likelihood of being successful as an independent, which is a tough road to hoe.
Yes, it is.
It is, but if there was ever a year for it, it was this year. Franco, 10 seconds before we got to go. I'll let you wrap it up.
Brad's putting a lot of eggs in the criminal indictment basket, and I'm afraid that omelet's not going to be made, my friend.
Well, that cloud of suspicion still hangs over, and it's a lot more talk about it every single week, guys. But stay tuned. We'll see what happens with that. Franco Ripple, Brad Blakeman, thanks so much for being with us, guys.
Thank you.
And just ahead here on Newsmax Now, we tackle the issue of literacy, why it's a bigger problem than many of us realize, and how one foundation hopes to change that. Plus, we still want to hear from you. What do you think about former Texas Governor Rick Perry endorsing his fellow Texan crews?